Is Ayato balanced? Is he too balanced, according to some? Well, not really, he's just bland, and I'll explain why. Now, to set the scene for what you will see in the Spiral Abyss, I'll just show you my Ayato stats. We're obviously on our alternative account here, so most of the 5 stars here are at Constellation 0, and yeah, this is just to set the scene for what you will see in the Spiral Abyss. So, what are my problems with Ayato? Well, it's not his damage at all. I think his damage is pretty fine. The number one thing that happens when a new character comes out is, the usual. We grab your nearest Bennett, Kazuha, and a bit of Xiangling, in this case for Vaporize, and we want to get the big fancy damage per screenshot numbers, and oh my god, he's so free, if to be friendly, everyone's just, drooling all over the character, but I think that all misses the point. And the point is that there is no point to this character. Ayato lacks identity in Genshin Impact. And I think this is as a function of two things. I think the first thing is his near constant uptime in terms of his elemental burst and his elemental skill cooldown being so low. And I think the second portion is, what does he really do in the game? It's like a genuine question, like what does this character do? So let's just get into it more practically. You can see animation cancel sucrose takes forever on the Ayato elemental burst, and I've already expended all my cooldowns from all my other characters, getting a little bit of a sucrose taser, a little bit of a fancy shenanigans going here, and finally we have Ayato. And at this point you might say, well, this is all looking pretty good, but not really, because what is actually happening here? I've got characters like Sucrose and Beidou that have very long elemental skill cooldowns and burst cooldowns and all these things, and I've got Ayato that's essentially sitting here waiting for things to happen. Now, it would have been much better if Ayato had longer cooldowns, but stronger hitting abilities. In other words, if you've got a character that's got consistent uptime, then obviously you have to balance this out by ensuring that his damage is not too strong. In contrast, if you've got a character, for instance, like Eula, that needs to be on the field for 9 seconds before she can dish out a ton of damage, well, that's sort of like the way you'd balance things. So it's almost like balancing severity and frequency in terms of cooldowns. And this is where I think Ayato fails a bit. In a certain sense, when you add up his damage, it is alright, but it's not punchy. It's not like I'm using this ability and now I can overlap and weave cooldowns between the rest of my team members and sort of use them in a proper rotation. It doesn't matter what rotation you're going to play with Ayato, you will always sit with him and there will be dead space where you just have his cooldowns ready, but you still need to use the rest of your teammates. And I think this is my one problem with him. He's almost too easy to play. He's a watered down version from what he was initially in the beta, and I sort of kind of really hate the direction that MiHoYo went with him. Yes, they made him more accessible, more easier to play for the majority of people, but I think it almost led to a very bland character. And this is my second point. What is the point of Ayato in this team? Can anyone sort of tell me? Because, well, Sucrose, it's kind of obvious. You swirl, you apply, you increase your EM, you group up the enemies. Sucrose's identity is very clear. Rosaria's identity is very clear in this team in terms of freezing, passing down crit rate to Beidou as well. And Beidou's like doing the AoE damage reduction, parrying. There's a lot that I can say about each one of these characters, but what's the point of having Ayato here? Why not just use Xingshu as a 4-star alternative? Why not use Kokomi, Tartaglia? So my point is, what are you going to remember Ayato by? Like, ask any Theorycraft and Kaching mains, and you say the word Xiangling and they'll say, ooh, Pyronado. If you say Bennett, Q. Like, a lot of people have very strong identities associated with certain characters, but with Ayato you don't get this. All you get is someone that is on paper good enough, but that's all he can be. Good enough on paper, and that is what lacks identity. So let's just look at this same scenario again, but with a character like Kokomi, and let's just go through all the arguments again. So what does Kokomi have in her favor? Well, she's got long cooldowns that I can overlap or weave with the rest of my cast cooldowns. So in this case, you saw how I systematically went through Sucrose, Rosaria, Beidou before coming back to Kokomi, and the cool thing about having these long elemental skill and burst cooldowns is that it gives me a very natural break point where I can then switch to other characters on my team. So that is very strong. From an elemental skill cooldown, there's a definite pattern, there's a definite sort of lock-in playstyle. And then the other thing with Kokomi is, what does she do? Well, she heals the entire team. She's a juggernaut. She does ranged damage. She's a hydro applicator. This is the power of Kokomi. She's a role compressor. So when you think of her, you're thinking, well, how can I use the multitude of roles that she has? If I just want to use TDS and Jellyfish Bot like all the Fury Crafters want you to do, you can do so. But if you want to use more of her, like I'm showing you in the background, you can do so as well. She's got a very strong identity as a very strong all-round character, and that's what makes her so cool. That's what gives her a definite identity. And this is the big thing that Ayato lacks, and that is why I find him honestly to be bland.